never thought a single sentence could erase years of sacrifice. One afternoon, standing in my own kitchen, I was told I was a burden, that I should go to a home or get out. I didn't shout back. I didn't defend myself. I picked up my keys and walked outside, carrying something heavier than a suitcase. What happened after that changed everything I believed about family, dignity, and silence. And I wonder, how many of us have stood in that same quiet moment? Sunday lunches used to be simple. Food on the table, the television low. Everyone pretending the week ahead wasn't already heavy. That afternoon in the Atlanta suburbs didn't feel different at first. Plates were half full. The air smelled like reheated chicken and canned green beans. I stood at the sink, rinsing a dish, listening more than talking, like I had learned to do. Then my son-in-law pushed his chair back. "We can't keep doing this," he said. I turned slightly, still holding the plate. His voice had that edge I'd come to recognize, the one that showed up whenever money, space, or patience ran thin. "Doing what?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He looked past me toward my daughter. She sat at the table, fingers wrapped around her glass, eyes fixed on the surface like it held something worth studying. "You living here like this," he said. "It's not working." I set the plate down and dried my hands. No rush, no sharp movements. "Like what?" I asked again. He stood up fully then, taller than me, shoulders tight. "You're getting older. You forget things. You need more help than we can give." I waited. Silence has a way of making people reveal more than they intend. "Either you go to a home," he said, "or you move out." The words landed without ceremony, no pause, no apology. He walked to the hallway closet and dragged out the old brown suitcase I'd kept there since my wife passed. The zipper caught as he yanked it, fabric scraping against the floor. He shoved it toward the front door. "Pack your things." My daughter didn't look up. I felt something tighten in my chest, not sharp, just firm, a familiar pressure. The kind that comes when you've swallowed too much for too long. "It's my house," I said quietly. He scoffed. "Not the way it's been," he replied. I thought about correcting him, about reminding him whose name was on the deed, about the years I worked city maintenance, rain or heat, keeping buildings safe that I didn't own, about the mortgage payments I never missed, about letting them move in when things got hard for them. None of that came out. Instead, I picked up a towel and wiped the counter. A crumb stuck to the surface and I brushed it into my palm. "I'll clean up," I said. He stared at me like I was dodging something important. "Did you hear me?" I did. My voice stayed even. That surprised him more than anger would have. I stacked the plates, carried them to the sink and rinsed them one by one. Water ran over my hands. The noise filled the room. Behind me, I could feel him waiting for a reaction that never came. When I finished, I hung the towel back on its hook and walked past the suitcase by the door. Its leather was cracked, corners worn soft from time. I'd brought it with me years ago, thinking I'd be here a few months at most. On the porch, the air felt cooler. I leaned against the railing and took a slow breath. Across the street, a neighbour pushed a stroller. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Ordinary sounds. Life continuing without noticing the shift happening inside me. I remembered the first time my son-in-law corrected me in front of someone. A joke about my hearing. Everyone laughed. I had smiled then too. I remembered being asked to watch the kids because it was easier if I did, being told not to touch certain cabinets, being reminded which chair was his. Those moments hadn't felt like much on their own, just small adjustments, compromises, things you accept when you're trying to keep peace. Behind the front door, voices dropped low. My name floated through once, then stopped. I didn't strain to hear more. The porch creaked as I shifted my weight. My hands rested on the railing, veins visible, steady. I noticed how often I'd chosen quiet because it seemed kinder, easier, less disruptive. It hadn't protected anything. The door opened. My daughter stepped out. "Dad," she said. I turned. Her eyes were red but dry. "You know how he gets when he's stressed." I nodded. "You can stay for now," she added. "Just think about what he said." I looked past her, through the doorway where the suitcase still waited like an answer already decided. "I'll take a walk," I said. She didn't stop me. Down the sidewalk, my steps fell into an old rhythm. Left foot, right, past trimmed lawns and parked cars. Each step loosened something I'd been holding too tight. I wasn't angry yet. That came later. What I felt then was clearer than that. Silence, I realized, had stopped being patience. It had turned into permission. And as I reached the corner, keys cold in my hand, I understood I couldn't keep giving that away without disappearing altogether. By Monday morning, the house felt smaller. Not because anything had moved, but because my place in it had. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Doors closed a little faster. The coffee pot was suddenly off limits after 9 because someone said it wasted electricity. No one explained these changes. They just happened. I kept my routine. Up early, shower, toast. I folded my jacket the same way I always had and placed it on the chair that used to be mine. Later that day, it wasn't there anymore. My son-in-law had moved it to the coat rack near the garage. "It's better there," he said, not looking at me. I nodded and said nothing. The story spread faster than I expected. A cousin called to check in, her voice careful. "Your daughter says you're having a hard time adjusting," she said. "Change can be tough at your age." At the grocery store, a neighbour asked if I was doing okay with all that family stuff. At church, someone patted my arm and said they'd pray I found peace with what was coming next. No one asked what had actually happened. I answered politely, short replies, neutral words, the kind that don't invite questions. Inside the house, decisions were made without me. The kids' schedules changed. A contractor came by to measure the spare room I used. I learned about it when I saw tape marks on the floor. "We're thinking of converting this space," my son-in-law said. "It'll be more functional." "For who?" I asked. "For the family." That word again, used like a door that shut quietly in my face. At night, I lay awake longer than usual. Not replaying the argument, but tracking patterns. How often my name was used when I wasn't present. How often my things were moved. How frequently the phrase, "we decided," replaced, "what do you think?" It wasn't one big push. It was pressure applied slowly, evenly, until resistance felt pointless. On Wednesday, my daughter handed me a pamphlet she'd left on the counter. "Just information," she said. "No rush." Assisted living. Smiling faces. promises of care. "He didn't talk to me about this," I said. She shifted her weight. "We didn't want to upset you." I folded the pamphlet once and set it down. "Not talking to me does that anyway." She didn't respond. I went for a walk that afternoon, longer than usual, past the post office, past the barber shop where I used to get my hair cut every other Saturday. People waved. I waved back. On the way home, I stopped by a small cafe near the courthouse. The place smelled like burnt coffee and old wood. I ordered a cup and sat near the window, letting time pass without checking it. That's where I ran into Leonard. He'd been a supervisor in city maintenance when I was still working. Retired now. Same steady eyes. "You look tired," he said, sliding into the seat across from me without asking. "Long week." He studied my face for a moment. "That house still in your name?" I blinked. "What?" "Humour me." "Yes," I said, "as far as I know." He leaned back. "As far as you know isn't enough." I didn't answer right away. The coffee cooled between my hands. "You letting people handle paperwork for you?" he asked. "Some things." "Because it's easier?" I shrugged. "Because I trusted them." Leonard nodded slowly. "Trust doesn't replace verification." The words stayed with me after he left. Back home, I noticed a folder missing from the cabinet where I kept old statements. Not gone, just relocated. I asked where it was. "We reorganized," my son-in-law said. "Less clutter." That night, I logged into my bank account. Nothing dramatic, just a few small transfers I didn't recognize, labeled as household expenses. Reasonable amounts. Easy to ignore. I didn't ignore them. I printed the statements the next morning at the library, sat at a corner table and read every line. Dates, notes, patterns forming where I hadn't looked before. The quiet around me felt different now. Not peaceful. Watchful. At dinner, my son-in-law talked about selling the house someday. Not soon, just eventually. "We'll figure something out for you," he said, like he was talking about furniture. I chewed slowly and listened. Later, in my room, I placed the printed pages inside a plain envelope and slid it into my jacket pocket. The fabric felt heavier than before. From the hallway came laughter, then silence. I sat on the edge of the bed and tied my shoes, not because I needed to go anywhere, but because sitting still had started to feel like consent. The bank notification came while I was tying my shoes. A small alert, easy to miss. I sat back down and opened it anyway. The amount wasn't large, labelled as a household expense. The date didn't line up with anything I remembered paying for. I told myself there had to be an explanation. At breakfast, I mentioned it casually. "There's a withdrawal I don't recognise," I said, "from last week." My son-in-law didn't look up from his phone. "Probably utilities," he replied. "Things add up." "I usually track those." He waved a hand. "You've been forgetting little things lately." The sentence slid across the table like it had been practiced. Later that day, I opened the drawer where I kept a few family items. Nothing valuable in a financial sense, but important to me. A watch my wife gave me before she passed. A ring from my father. A folded letter written in my mother's careful handwriting. The watch wasn't there. I checked again, slower this time. Lifted papers, looked beneath them. Nothing. I asked my daughter, "Have you seen the watch?" She hesitated. "Which one?" The silver one from the top drawer. She frowned slightly. Are you sure you didn't move it? I waited. I don't move that, I said. It stays there. She glanced toward the hallway, then back at me. You've been under a lot of stress, Dad. That was the moment doubt crept in. Not about them, about me. I replayed the last few weeks in my head, tried to remember every small decision, every object I'd touched. The mind can betray you when you're tired, when you're trying too hard to keep peace. That night, I lay awake and tested myself, named items in the room, counted steps to the bathroom. Everything felt intact, clear. The next morning, I checked the account again. Another transfer, different date, same pattern. At the library, I printed 3 months of statements, spread them out on a long table meant for students, tracked amounts with a pen borrowed from the front desk. Lines formed, regular, quiet. Someone had been careful. Back home, a lock appeared on the file cabinet in the den. I hadn't seen it installed. No one mentioned it. We needed to secure important documents, my son-in-law said when I asked. Just being responsible. Who has the key? We do. That answer ended the conversation before it could start. Phone calls slowed. Friends I usually heard from every week grew distant. When I reached out, replies came late, polite, shallow. Screenshots sent to an email account they didn't know about. I reduced contact with anyone who seemed to carry messages back to the house. At dinner, decisions were announced instead of discussed. We're meeting with someone next week, my son-in-law said, about long-term planning. For what? I asked. For you. No details followed. The watch never reappeared. Neither did the ring. When I asked again, the response came sharper. We already talked about this, he said. Don't start accusing people. Accusing. That word did something to me. I stopped asking. That evening I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands. The same hands that fixed broken doors, balanced budgets, signed papers without reading the fine print because family was supposed to mean something. Trust had made me efficient. It had also made me careless. I folded the printed statements and slipped them into an envelope, added the notebook, placed everything inside my jacket. In the hallway, laughter rose and fell. A television turned on. Life moved forward without checking whether I was keeping up. I stood, slid my arms into the jacket, and reached for the door handle. Not certain where I was going yet, only that staying still had stopped being an option. The announcement didn't come in private. That would have required courtesy. It came on a Thursday evening, with 2 of my wife's cousins sitting on the couch, and my daughter's friend lingering near the doorway like she hadn't meant to stay. My son-in-law cleared his throat. We've been talking, he said, folding his hands together, about what's best going forward. No one asked who we included. There's a place nearby, he continued. Long-term care, structured, safe. They know how to handle these things. I leaned back in the chair and crossed my ankles. What things? I asked. He smiled, the tight kind that tries to look patient. Memory, organization, day-to-day needs. One of the cousins nodded slowly, like this was news she'd already accepted. It's not a nursing home, my daughter added quickly. Assisted living, there's a difference. Who decided this? I asked. Silence answered first. Then he spoke again. We did. For everyone's sake. I looked around the room. Faces avoided mine. No one met my eyes long enough to stay in the conversation. "When were you planning to tell me?" I asked. "We're telling you now." My voice stayed level. "And you thought doing it like this made sense?" He shrugged. "Transparency." That word landed wrong. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Not without a conversation that includes me." He exhaled sharply. "This is the conversation." Something in his tone shifted, less polite, more final. "We can't keep carrying this," he added. "The stress, the responsibility." "You mean me?" "I mean the situation." I stood slowly and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, drank it, set the glass down. "I'm still capable of deciding where I live," I said, returning to the room. "We'll see," he replied. The words didn't raise his voice, but they carried weight. The visit ended awkwardly. People gathered their things. Hugs felt forced. Promises to check in hung in the air without direction. After the door closed, I went to my room and opened my laptop. Logged into my bank account out of habit now, not worry. An error message appeared. I tried again. Access denied. I refreshed. Reset the password. Another error. In the den, a printer hummed. Papers slid out, one after another. "What are you printing?" I asked from the hallway. "Just paperwork," he replied. "Don't worry about it." I worried anyway. By the time I reached the bank the next morning, the manager recognized me. She pulled up my account and frowned. "There was a change request yesterday," she said. "What kind of change?" "Authorization, access levels." I felt the room tilt slightly. "By who?" She checked the screen. "Someone listed as a household representative." "That's not accurate." "It was submitted with documentation." I didn't argue with her. I asked for copies. She hesitated, then printed them. A signature stared back at me. My name, not my handwriting. "I need full statements," I said. She nodded and got to work. At home, the file cabinet was locked. The desk drawer where I kept older documents was empty. Even my spare checkbook was gone. "We're streamlining," my son-in-law said when I asked. "Too much clutter creates confusion." "Give it back." "There's no reason for you to handle that now." I didn't raise my voice. "I'm asking once." He looked past me toward my daughter. "See what I mean?" he said. "This is exactly why we need structure." She stood there, arms folded, saying nothing. That night I slept lightly, not from fear, but from calculation. Every sound registered, every step in the hallway noted. In the morning, I drove to Leonard's place without calling ahead. He opened the door and took one look at my face. "Sit down," he said. I laid the papers on his table, the altered access, the forged signature, the timeline. He read quietly. "They moved faster than I expected," he said. "So did I." He nodded once. "You need a lawyer." "I know. Not just any lawyer." We talked for an hour. Options, risks, next steps. No promises. No comfort. On the way back, I stopped at the library again. Scanned documents, saved files. Opened a new folder and labelled it with a date, not a name. At dinner, my son-in-law talked about logistics. Dates, transportation, a tour of the facility. I ate slowly and listened. "We'll handle the arrangements," he said. "You won't have to worry." I wiped my mouth with a napkin and stood. "I'm going out," I said. "Where?" "To take care of something." No one followed. No one stopped me. Outside, the car door closed with a solid sound. My phone buzzed with a notification from the bank, confirming receipt of a formal inquiry. I put the phone in my pocket, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway, already running through the list of calls I needed to make next. The message arrived late in the evening, from an address I didn't recognize. No greeting, no name, just a sentence and an attachment. "You might want to look at what you signed last spring." I sat at the small desk in my room and opened the file. It took a moment to load. When it did, the page looked ordinary enough. A form I remembered seeing before. Authorization language. My name typed neatly at the bottom. I leaned closer and traced the text with my eyes. The phrasing felt familiar. Too familiar. Last spring, my son-in-law had asked me to sign a stack of papers at the kitchen table. "Just routine stuff," he'd said. "For the house. For insurance. Easier if everything's consistent." I'd skimmed. Trusted, signed where he pointed, one page after another, because dinner was getting cold and the kids were restless, and I didn't want to be the reason things slowed down. Now, seeing it again, I noticed what I hadn't then. The scope, the permissions, the way a few broad sentences handed over far more than I'd understood. I printed the file and slid it into the growing envelope in my jacket. The next morning, Lena drove me to a law office downtown. No big sign, just a name on the door. Inside, a man about my age greeted us with a firm handshake and eyes that didn't wander. "Tell me everything," he said. I didn't rush. I laid it out in order. The conversation at lunch, the missing items, the account changes, the paperwork, the message from the unknown sender. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back slightly. "You have two paths here," he said. "You can stay quiet and hope this settles on its own, or you can take control before more damage is done." "What happens if I stay quiet?" I asked. "They keep moving the line," he replied, "and you keep adjusting until there's nothing left to adjust." He didn't sugarcoat it. I appreciated that. "And if I act, then it gets uncomfortable for everyone." I nodded once. On the drive back, Leonard didn't talk much. Neither did I. Traffic slowed near the courthouse. People crossed the street carrying folders like mine. At home, the shift was already underway. My daughter stopped returning my calls. Family members who used to check in now spoke to me through her, passing messages that sounded rehearsed. "They're just worried about you," one aunt said. "You seem confused lately." "I'm not confused," I replied. "That's what worries us." The words were calm. The intention wasn't. My son-in-law took control of the narrative with precision. He shared selective concerns, framed his actions as protective, repeated the same phrases until they sounded reasonable. "We're just trying to keep him safe. He doesn't see how much help he needs. This is hard on all of us." I noticed how often my voice was absent from those conversations. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone. "If we don't act soon, it'll be a mess," he said. "Better to get ahead of it." That evening, I found a meeting invitation on the kitchen counter, a family discussion scheduled for the weekend. Names listed, mine included, but only at the bottom. I didn't react, not outwardly. Instead, I called the lawyer again. "I want to proceed," I said. "Then we start documenting everything," he replied. I spent the next days gathering what I could without drawing attention. Old emails, copies of statements, photos of receipts. I kept the originals where they were and worked from duplicates. I also stopped explaining myself. When someone asked how I was doing, I said fine. When they offered advice, I thanked them and changed the subject. The less I said, the clearer things became. The anonymous sender wrote again, "Check the dates on the transfers." I did. Patterns emerged. Timing lined up with decisions made without me. Repairs authorized I hadn't requested. Fees for services I'd never used. None of it screamed theft. That was the point. It whispered. At the scheduled family meeting, I sat at the end of the table. People spoke over me, around me, about me. "We just want to make sure you're comfortable," my son-in-law said. "Comfortable where?" I asked. He smiled thinly. "Somewhere with proper care." I looked at my daughter. "Is that what you want?" Her eyes flicked away. "I want what's best." "For who?" No one answered that. Afterward, I returned to my room and closed the door. The house hummed with voices, then quieted. I pulled the envelope from my jacket and added the latest documents. It was getting thick now, harder to ignore. On my phone, a message from the lawyer waited. "We're ready when you are." I stood, slid the envelope back into the pocket, and straightened the jacket. Down the hall, footsteps approached, then passed. At the front door, I paused long enough to check that I had my keys. Not to leave yet, just to be sure they were still mine. Work began quietly, the way things do when noise would only give away position. Mornings started earlier. I left the house before anyone else stirred, keys pocketed, jacket zipped, engine running while the garage door lifted just enough. Atlanta was already awake in pieces. Delivery trucks, buses, people headed somewhere with purpose. The lawyer preferred different places for different conversations. A small office near Peachtree for document review, a cafe near the courthouse for timelines. Once a public library branch where printers worked and questions didn't. Each meeting added weight to the folder I carried, not because of volume, but because of clarity. Statements were spread out and compared, dates circled, amounts matched against approvals that never came from me. A notary stamp looked real until you studied the angle. A signature passed at a glance, then failed under scrutiny. The lawyer didn't rush. "We build this piece by piece," he said. "Clean, verifiable." I nodded and took notes. Back at home, behavior changed. My son-in-law started watching more closely. Not openly, just enough to notice patterns. When I came in late, he asked where I'd been. "Running errands?" "Which ones?" "The kind that don't concern you." That and a tight smile and nothing more. Text messages arrived from unknown numbers. Short, vague. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I didn't reply. Another came 2 days later. "People get hurt when families fight." I saved it and moved on. Leonard checked in once, then stopped. We'd agreed that fewer visible connections meant fewer threads to pull. Silence this time served a purpose. Documents multiplied. I scanned everything twice, stored copies in places that weren't obvious. An email account opened under a name that didn't point back to me. Passwords changed. access logs reviewed. The work settled me. Focus narrowed. Sleep came easier, not deeper, but more honest. Dreams didn't linger. At dinner, my son-in-law spoke in summaries, plans, schedules, appointments he expected me to attend. "We'll drive you there," he said one night. "I'll manage my own transportation," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "That won't be necessary soon." I finished eating and cleared my plate. "It is now." The children stayed quiet. My daughter watched the exchange like someone tracking weather, not choosing sides. One afternoon, I caught him going through the hallway closet. My closet. Papers spread across the floor. "Looking for something?" I asked. He didn't flinch. "Just checking." "For what?" "Things that could get lost." "Put them back." He hesitated, then complied. The hesitation mattered. Later, at the bank, a teller lowered her voice. "There's been a request to move additional funds." "By who?" She glanced at the screen. "The same representative." "Don't approve it," I said. "We need formal notice." "You'll have it." By evening, the lawyer had filed it. Tension didn't spike all at once. It crept. A glance held too long. A door closed harder than needed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when I entered a room. I didn't confront any of it. Instead, I reviewed timelines again, made sure dates aligned, cross-checked notes, practiced answering questions out loud while driving, not to rehearse emotion, but to keep facts sharp. One night, a car idled across the street longer than usual. Engine running, lights off. I noticed, then went inside and locked the door. The next morning, a voicemail waited. "We need to talk," my son-in-law said, "about where this is headed." I didn't return the call. The lawyer sent a brief message. "We're ready to file when you say." I didn't answer right away. That afternoon, I walked through the house and took inventory. What was mine? What had been moved? What had already been claimed without permission? Nothing sentimental left within reach. The watch was gone. The ring, too. No surprise there. In my room, I packed a small bag. Just essentials. Papers stayed with me. Everything else could wait. Downstairs, laughter rose from the living room. A show playing. Life continuing on a schedule that no longer included me. I sat on the edge of the bed and checked my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Quiet. The quiet felt different now. Not like before. Not like giving in. I stood, slipped the bag over my shoulder and turned the handle, already moving through the steps ahead without needing to say them out loud. The notice came taped to the front door, not slid under, not mailed quietly, taped where anyone walking past could see it. I read it once, then again, slower. Temporary restrictions, limited access, pending review. Language meant to sound neutral, almost helpful, while stripping things down to the bones. No withdrawals without approval. No changes to property arrangements. No entry into certain areas of the house to avoid conflict. My son-in-law stood behind me in the hallway. "It's just a precaution," he said, "until things settle." "You filed this," I replied. "We had to protect everyone." The word protect had become flexible lately. Neighbours watched from across the street. Someone pretended to check their phone. Another nodded at me like they understood something I didn't. Inside, the air felt altered. Not hostile. Official. A line had been drawn without asking whether I agreed to stand on the other side. I called the lawyer from the car, parked at the curb because I wasn't sure where I was allowed to be anymore. "They moved first," he said, after I read the notice aloud. "What does it mean?" "It means they're trying to box you in, make you look unstable, force you to react. And if I don't, then they'll keep tightening." The phone went quiet for a second. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "Outside my house. Don't go back in until we talk." I sat there longer than planned, watched my daughter pull the curtains closed, watched the porch light flick on though the sun hadn't set yet. At the cafe near the courthouse, the lawyer spread the papers across the table. A waitress came by twice before either of us spoke. "This isn't about care anymore," he said. "It's about control." I nodded. "They're positioning you as a risk to yourself, to assets." "Based on what?" "Based on repetition and silence." I thought about all the times I hadn't corrected the story, all the moments I'd chosen not to make things uncomfortable. Outside, people crossed the street in steady lines. Someone laughed. Someone argued into a phone. "If this goes through," he continued, "you'll need permission to do almost anything. From them or from the court." My phone buzzed. A message from a cousin. "Why didn't you tell us you were struggling like this?" I didn't answer. Another came in. "They're only trying to help." The words stacked up. Helpful, protective, necessary. None of them felt true. I drove to the library instead of home, sat at a table near the back, printed the notice, highlighted phrases, made notes in the margins, compared it to earlier documents. Patterns lined up again. Same wording, same signatures. I wasn't surprised. Still, something inside me shifted. Not anger, something steadier. That evening, a social worker called. "I'm just checking in," she said. "We received concerns about your living situation." "From who?" "Family members." "And what are the concerns?" "That you may not be able to manage independently." "Have you spoken to me before today?" "No." "Have you reviewed my records?" "Not yet." "Then you should," I replied. She paused. "I'll note that." After the call ended, I sat with my hands folded on the table. The room was quiet. Not empty, just unoccupied. I thought about my wife, how she used to say, "Silence can be generous, but it can also be misleading." At the time, I hadn't understood what she meant. Now I did. The lawyer called back later that night. "We can file tomorrow morning," he said, "or we can wait and see how they push next." "What happens if we wait?" "They define you before you speak." I didn't hesitate. File. Sleep didn't come easily, but it came. Not deep, not restless, just enough. By morning, messages filled my phone. Some worried, some accusing, some careful enough to sound kind. I dressed without hurry, chose a shirt I'd worn to job interviews years ago. Not because it looked impressive, but because it felt like mine. At the courthouse, security waved me through after checking my ID. A small courtesy. A reminder that not everyone saw me the way my family now did. The lawyer met me in the hallway. "Once this is filed," he said, "there's no going back to quiet." Quiet stopped helping a while ago. He nodded and handed me a pen. I signed where he indicated. Once. Cleanly. Outside, my phone rang. My daughter this time. "Dad, what are you doing?" she asked. "Protecting myself." "You're making this worse." "No," I said. "I'm making it clear." She went silent. "We could have handled this together," she said finally. "We could have talked," I replied. That chance passed. I hung up before the conversation bent itself into something else. Back in the car, I sat with the engine off. The courthouse doors opened and closed behind me. People came and went with their own reasons. A man across the lot argued with someone on speakerphone. A woman leaned against her car and cried quietly. Life didn't stop for legal filings. On the drive away, I passed the neighborhood again. Slower this time. Not to look, but because traffic demanded it. The porch light was still on. I didn't pull in. At the next intersection, I turned instead toward Leonard's place. He opened the door before I knocked. "It's done," I said. He stepped aside without comment. Inside, I set my bag down and checked my phone. A new message from the lawyer waited. Next step scheduled. I placed the phone face down on the table and sat back, listening to the kettle begin to heat in the kitchen, letting the day move forward without asking permission. The call came from a number I didn't have saved. I let it ring once, then answered. "You don't know me," the woman said, "but I know what they did." Her voice stayed low, controlled. "I handled the paperwork," she continued. "Not everything, just enough to recognize when something wasn't right. We agreed to meet the next morning at a small office park off Beaufort Highway. No names exchanged, no promises made. She arrived early and chose a seat near the wall. A thin folder rested on the table between us. Nothing flashy, no dramatic build-up. "I notarized documents for your family last year," she said. "Some came through twice, different dates, same signatures." She slid the folder closer. "That's not normal." Inside were copies stamped and signed. My name appeared more than once, steady and familiar at first glance. The differences emerged only when you knew where to look. Pressure. Slant. Timing. "I didn't notarize those versions," she said, "but my stamp was used." "How?" "Someone had access to a scan, or a copy, enough to recreate it." I didn't interrupt. Let her finish. "I reported it internally when I noticed the transfers tied to those documents," she added. "It didn't go far. Your son-in-law made it sound urgent, protective. People tend to believe that tone." She paused. "I'm not comfortable with how this was handled." I thanked her without ceremony. We exchanged no more words than necessary. Outside, I sat in the car and opened the folder again. Dates lined up with the transfers I'd already flagged. The notary logs contradicted the claims filed on my behalf. One page even included an internal memo I hadn't seen before. The lawyer reviewed everything that afternoon. "This changes leverage," he said. "Not the direction, the speed." "How much?" "Enough to force honesty." Back at Leonard's place, I laid the papers out on the kitchen table. He stood quietly, arms crossed, letting me work. "He still looks like he's in control," Leonard said finally. "That's the point." Phone calls kept coming, some cautious, some aggressive. "You're tearing the family apart," one relative said. "This is unnecessary," another added. I didn't argue. Facts don't respond to volume. At the house, my son-in-law maintained his posture, calm, concerned. He spoke carefully whenever others were present. "We're just waiting for guidance," he told people. "This is stressful for everyone." Behind closed doors, the tone shifted. "You're making things difficult," he said one evening over the phone. "You don't understand the damage you're causing." "I understand it clearly," I replied. "You're confused. That's not a defense." He laughed softly. "You think you found something. You haven't." I ended the call. The lawyer scheduled the meeting for the following week. Neutral ground, conference room, documents exchanged ahead of time. Leading up to it, pressure increased. My daughter sent messages late at night. "Can't we talk without lawyers?" I didn't answer. Another followed. "He's scared." That one stayed unread. The day before the meeting, I went through everything one more time. Not because I doubted it, but because repetition steadied me. Each document had a place. Each note matched a source. Patterns had a way of revealing weakness. In this case, it was consistency. The same signature used too often. The same justification repeated across different forms. Control disguised as care. At the meeting, my son-in-law arrived confident, relaxed shoulders, easy smile. He greeted the lawyer like someone expecting cooperation. "We're hoping to resolve this quickly," he said. "So am I," the lawyer replied. The witness joined us midway through, introduced by role, not name. She spoke plainly, presented records, answered questions without embellishment. My son-in-law's expression shifted, not suddenly, but in increments. A pause here, a glance there. His words slowed. "That's not accurate," he said at one point. "It's documented," the lawyer replied. "He authorized this." "Not in that form." Silence followed, the kind that forces people to choose their next move carefully. "You're misinterpreting the intent," my son-in-law tried again. "Intent doesn't override process." He turned to me. "You're really going to do this?" I met his eyes. "You already did." The meeting ended without resolution. No shouting, no threats, just an agreement to reconvene. Outside, my phone buzzed. A message from the lawyer. "They're cornered. Expect pushback." I walked past the parked cars and unlocked mine. Sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. The road ahead wasn't smooth, that much was clear. But for the first time, the pieces fit together without forcing them, and the next step didn't feel like a guess anymore. The conference room felt smaller than it had the week before. Same table, same chairs, fewer pleasantries. My son-in-law arrived late this time. No smile, no attempt at ease. He took the seat across from me and placed his phone face down, like it was something he didn't trust himself to look at. The lawyer opened the folder without ceremony. "We're here to address the disputed authorizations and the resulting transfers," he said. "Nothing else." "This has gone too far," my son-in-law replied. "You're letting him twist things." No one reacted. The lawyer slid a document across the table. "This is the notarized version you submitted, and this is the original entry from the notary's log." My son-in-law leaned forward, scanning the page. "That doesn't prove anything." "It proves the stamp was copied," the lawyer said, "and that the signature doesn't match contemporaneous samples." He laughed once, sharp and quick. "You're going to side with him because he's old?" The word landed and stayed there. "Age isn't the issue," the lawyer replied. "Evidence is." My chest tightened for a moment, not from the insult, from the memory behind it. Years of being spoken over, years of being reduced to inconvenience. The feeling passed. "You're forgetting context," my son-in-law said, turning to me. "You agreed to let me handle things. You said you trusted me." "I trusted you not to misuse that trust," I replied. "You're confused," he snapped. "You don't remember what you signed." The lawyer raised a hand. "We do remember. That's why we're here." Another document followed, then another. Bank statements, dates highlighted, amounts matched. "These transfers coincide with approvals you claim were granted," the lawyer said. "They do not coincide with any instruction from my client." "He needed help," my son-in-law said. "Someone had to step in." "Help doesn't require secrecy." "You're acting like I stole something." "You redirected funds without consent," the lawyer replied. "That's the definition." My son-in-law's jaw tightened. He looked at me again, this time with something closer to desperation. "You're really going to let this destroy the family?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted the words to land clean. "The family didn't break today," I said. "It broke when you decided I didn't need to know what was being done in my name." He shook his head. "You're making yourself the victim." "No," I said. "I'm refusing to stay quiet." The room went still. He leaned back, folded his arms. "Fine," he said. "Let's talk about consequences then." "Let's." He straightened. "If this goes public, people will question your stability, your ability to manage. I won't be the only one talking." There it was, the last card. For a brief second, the old instinct surfaced, the one that urged caution, that warned against escalation. It didn't take hold. "That risk exists either way," I replied. "The difference is who controls the narrative." The lawyer placed one final document on the table. "We've already submitted these findings," he said. "Any further attempt to restrict access or misrepresent capacity will be addressed as retaliation." My son-in-law stared at the page. His foot tapped once, then stopped. "You planned this," he said quietly. "I prepared," I answered. "You could have talked to me." "I tried." Silence filled the space again, thicker this time, not empty. Conclusive. "We'll be pursuing restitution and reversal of all unauthorized changes," the lawyer continued. "A formal response is due within the week." My son-in-law stood abruptly. "This isn't over." "It is," I said. He hesitated, then turned toward the door without another word. I remained seated until the lawyer gathered the papers. "You handled that well," he said. "I handled it honestly." Outside the building, the day carried on like any other. Cars passed. Someone argued over a parking spot. A delivery truck idled near the curb. My phone buzzed with a message from my daughter. "He's furious." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to my car and placed the folder on the passenger seat. Sat there for a moment, hands resting on my knees, letting the noise of the street fade into background. The door closed with a solid sound. I started the engine and pulled away, already thinking about the next appointment on my calendar. Not with fear or anticipation, but with the steady awareness that the hardest part had already happened. The paperwork didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, over days, then weeks. Notices, confirmations, dates set and dates moved. Each envelope felt lighter than the last, not because the matter was small, but because it was no longer mine to carry alone. I learned where my fear had lived, not in money, not in property. It sat in the idea of being left behind, of losing connection and having nothing to replace it. Once I named it, the hold weakened. The court required restitution. Accounts were frozen, then adjusted. Transfers reversed. Penalties assessed. None of it felt dramatic in the moment. Clerks processed forms. Attorneys exchanged emails. Decisions appeared as typed lines with signatures at the bottom. My son-in-law stopped calling. His attorney didn't. Messages turned formal, then sparse, then silent. Neighbors changed their tone when they passed me on the sidewalk. Some offered small nods, others avoided eye contact. The story they'd heard no longer fit as cleanly as before. My daughter came by one afternoon. She didn't announce herself, just stood in the doorway and waited until I noticed. "I didn't know how to fix it," she said. I set a mug down on the table and took the chair across from her. "Fixing isn't always possible," I replied. "Choosing is." She pressed her lips together. "He says you humiliated him." "He humiliated himself." She flinched, then exhaled. "What happens now?" "That depends on what you're willing to accept." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she traced the edge of the table with her finger, the way she used to when she was thinking hard. "I can't pretend it didn't happen," she said finally. "Then don't." We talked without raising our voices, about boundaries, about what wasn't negotiable anymore, about what I would not return to. When she left, the house stayed quiet. Not empty, just settled. The legal consequences moved forward on their own timeline. Audits, reviews, a requirement to attend hearings. His name appeared in places he'd never expected. Employers asked questions. Banks tightened access. None of it gave me pleasure, it gave me closure. I found a small apartment closer to the city. Nothing fancy, clean lines, enough light. A place where the door locked behind me, without explanation. Moving took an afternoon. Leonard helped carry boxes. We worked without commentary. No speeches, no summaries. "You good?" he asked once. "I am." That night, I cooked for myself. Simple food. Ate at the counter. Cleaned as I went. My phone stayed face down. When I turned it over, there were messages I didn't open. They could wait, or they could fade. A week later, a letter arrived from the lawyer. Final accounting enclosed. Case status updated. No further action required unless requested. I filed it away. On Saturday morning, I walked through the neighborhood, past a park where kids played, sat on a bench and watched for a while. No one knew who I was or what I'd been through. That anonymity felt earned. I thought about reaching out, about reopening conversations, about softening edges. The thought passed. Back at the apartment, I arranged the last box on the shelf. Photos, a watch, papers that no longer needed to be guarded. I noticed how quiet the space had become. Not the heavy kind, the kind that lets you hear yourself think. In the evening, my daughter texted, "I'm staying somewhere else for a while." I replied once, "Take care of yourself." Nothing more followed. I sat by the window and let the day end on its own terms. No conclusions drawn, no lessons announced, just the steady sense that I'd stepped out of a room where my voice had been used against me, and into one where silence finally meant peace.